Welcome to episode 3 of Bar Student to Barrister, the podcast on your journey into pupillage and beyond into the early years of practice at the bar. This week, I'm really excited to introduce 3 really amazing people who are going to give you their insights into what resilience really means. This is a lecture that was recorded several weeks ago to ICCA Bar Course students, and it's entitled Failing Forwards, Building Resilience for a Career at the Bar of England and Wales. And the 3 people who give the talk are as follows. Tony Charles, first of all, is the Director of Education at Gray's Inn. He is a senior leader with a broad range of experience across all aspects of education and training. And the second speaker you'll hear from is Sarah Edelby. She's a barrister at 39 Essex Chambers, a legal professional, strategic advisor and effective advocate recognised by Legal 500 as a leading junior in the areas of administrative law and human rights, court of protection and community care, and inquests and inquiries. And finally, the third speaker is John Paul Fitzgibbon. He's a criminal and public international law barrister, a naval officer and commander. 3 quotes from Tony Charles perhaps best set the scene for what you are about to hear. Failure and resilience are inextricably linked and frequently misunderstood. Failure, success, learning and resilience are all part of the same equation. And that's really what we're going to focus on today, he says. And then the setbacks are not interruptions to success, they are part of its fabric. And as Tony also says, our message today is a positive one about the journey you are on, and it's a positive one about the journey ahead. We hope you enjoy this episode. Please like, subscribe, follow, all of those things. You can get this podcast on all platforms. We very much hope you enjoy what you're about to hear, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.
So good afternoon. My name is Tony, as Linda has said. Today, Sarah, John Paul and I, we're going to deliver a lecture that we've called Failing Forwards, Building Resilience for a Career at the Bar of England and Wales. You've heard about Sarah and John Paul's practices, and both of them will bring their perspectives as experienced practitioners, but also mentors and volunteers for Gray's Inn, where they contribute significantly to developing the next generation of barristers. So they've seen this from both the side of practice, but also some of the difficulties, insecurities, and barriers that people face when entering the profession. I'd like to start by thanking Linda and the staff of the ICCA for this invitation. At Gray's, we're very passionate about preparing students for the realities of practice, and we're really honoured to have this opportunity to chat to you today. So why have we chosen this subject? Why have we chosen to focus on something that we all really fear? We've chosen it because failure and resilience are inextricably linked and frequently misunderstood. You would have seen selection criteria for scholarships, for pupillage, and they talk about resilience. And sometimes I don't think we really understand what that means or how it's required. So our message today, we hope, in fact I know, is a positive one about the journey you are on, and it's a positive one about the journey ahead. And indeed, it's a journey many of you have been on before. In here, there will be accomplished people who are career changers, sports people, musicians. You've all been on a journey of some kind, of which failing and building resilience is all part. Failure, success, learning and resilience are all part of the same equation, and that's really what we're going to focus on today. So my starting point is why failure matters. So I want to begin not with a legal example, but a sporting one. So think about tennis. think about tennis at the very highest level, where every point that is played, every game that is played by some of the greatest players in the world is by people that have lost thousands of points and have lost hundreds of games. But we use the term great to describe sports people all the time. And that greatness isn't from a single moment in time, although that is part of the story. We define them by how they recover, how they learn, and how they respond to failure. So I'm assuming there aren't many elite athletes in the audience, and apologies if there are. But I think the psychological patterns of high performance sport really apply at the bar. Because as in sport, there are three things I want to identify. Firstly, there's probably someone on paper that always appears stronger. Secondly, the margins are often tiny and the standards are unforgiving. And finally, the setbacks are not interruptions to success, they are part of its fabric. And that is really, I guess, the underpinning tagline of this presentation. In law, I think there is a tendency to treat failure as a verdict, as a final judgment on our ability. But let's think about it as data. Let's think about it as a data point, information to reflect on, to work with, and to improve on. And that is really what this is about. It's about a deliberate and practical process of failing forwards. So Sarah and John Paul are the practicing barristers. They're going to share their perspectives, which are grounded in the job that you want to do and the job that you love. And you will know that being continually tested is part of that journey. Sarah's going to speak about our relationship with failure, and then John Paul will touch on our perception of what failure is. I'm going to really focus on resilience. So my role, as you know, is not as a barrister, but someone who works closely with the profession. And so I'll be framing some of the ideas and concepts that I think underpin resilience. So what about me? Through a number of professional twists and turns, I found myself working at the Inns of Court. My background is in education, teaching, and particularly the teaching of teachers. And all along the way, I've also worked a fair bit in coaching, both in both individual and team sports. And for a while, I felt that is where my career might lie. And there's a story I can tell you afterwards about my relationship with failure and why that wasn't the route that I took. I've seen the difference that having a healthy relationship with failing and disappointment can make. And that failing is absolutely an essential part of the story. So I've worked on and off with barristers since 2017, and I have two overriding observations. First, and generally, you are way too hard on yourselves. And secondly, you too frequently let the impact of a failure derail you. And in the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to touch on some of the tools and themes, some of it grounded in sort of cognitive behaviour, which may sound familiar. Indeed, for those of you that have studied psychology, you will probably know better than I, but I will focus principally on resilience. So why do these subjects matter so much at the bar? Well, I don't want to add to the data, I don't want to add to the stress, but you will know the pathway into practice is notoriously demanding. There is a bottleneck at pupillage, and then rejection and critique are woven into the fabric of your career. Written work is looked at critically by judges, your own clients, and I'm not going to go over the pupillage process with you. You know it better than I. So resilience isn't an optional extra. But here I want to challenge some of the common misconceptions about what we think resilience is. So resilience is not armour, it's not hardness, or it's an absence of feeling. True resilience is the capacity to recover. It's the capacity to bend and to grow. So some of you may be familiar with a psychologist called Carol Dweck. She wrote on something called the growth mindset. And those of you who have any experience of corporate coaching may know this. And a growth mindset, most importantly, isn't about blind optimism. It's about a process. It's not about, I will succeed no matter what. It's about a belief that ability develops through effort, it develops through strategy, and it develops through support networks. And that requires us to be open. It requires openness, openness to feedback, openness to learning, and openness to collaboration. Because your success ultimately is probably a team effort. So there's a new way that I want us to think about failure. So could you just jump forward a couple of slides? Thank you. So setbacks, for some of you, setbacks are going to be unfamiliar territory. You're high achievers. You're probably, I would guess, have succeeded quite a lot academically. But if we are going to use this concept that it's a matter of time before failure happens and becomes part of the fabric of life, then I think it's useful to think about competence. And Broadwell, writing about teachers, wrote about the 4 stages of competence, summarised quite badly by ChatGPT in this graphic. So unconscious incompetence, very simply, you don't know what you don't know. The gaps are invisible. It's the glorious comfort of ignorance. Conscious incompetence is suddenly you see the gap. You see that gap in your competence, and it is painful because this is the first time that you realise, hang on, there is a hill to climb here, and it is painful, and more about this later. Conscious competence is where, with deliberate practice, you improve, but it takes energy and attention. And then finally, the unconscious stage is where, with repetition, feedback, we get to a stage of mastery. You no longer do advocacy, you are an advocate. And I think this matters because most people give up at stage 2. That discomfort I spoke about is when most of us walk away, back to my sporting analogy and my uncomfortable truth that I started with. But if you can tolerate this discomfort, you do create the conditions for growth and for competence to follow. You will hear the term reflective practice and reflective practitioner a lot at the bar. And this is, I think, the key to how you survive stage 2. Can you become the reflective practitioner? Could you move forward? Thank you, Sarah. So this is where reflective practice comes in. And reflective practice isn't meaningless navel gazing. It's about making sense of failure so that it becomes the useful data that I've already spoken about. Gibbs' reflective cycle model is the model that most people go to when talking about reflective practice. And the reflective practitioner is something I would urge you all to read and to start thinking about because of this data point. What this process seems really, really obvious, and this process is formalised in a lot of environments. In the military, I know they've made a science and an art out of it. But I think the key here is the emphasis on feelings. The data that you get about performance, feedback, that data that we can use about knowledge and about skills and the application of knowledge is one thing. But building data about what you feel about failure is really, really key. So reflection written down is a really, really good thing. It can help you identify patterns over time. So you just don't learn about a particular thing. You build up patterns of behavior. And it's important when we fail because rejection and criticism carry an emotional sting. And this pragmatic approach can help you unpack that in performance. And most importantly, I think you allow yourself to action plan and grow. So I'm going to talk a bit about what I've called the emotional landscape of failure. And when rejected, and when we experience failure, it's really natural to feel anger. It could be, they didn't see how good I was, or it could be a denial reaction. They must have made a mistake, or sometimes it's just disbelief. I can't believe I failed that. I've always been top of my class. In her work on grief, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who some of you may have heard of identify denial and anger as natural early stages of loss. Why would that be applicable here? We bring grief into this model for discussion because when you work for something, when you work so hard for something, for a particular outcome, you're grieving for a future you imagined for yourself. You're grieving for an outcome. And that's really, really important because it's that grief reaction that can be a barrier to learning. So Kubler-Ross helps us see that those first waves of denial, anger, are not weakness. They're part of a very, very human cycle. But if we remain trapped in them, we never move into acceptance and we never move into learning. I'm going to bring in another psychologist in this moment, who's Susan Daykoff. And has anyone heard of Daykoff? No? So this is the one psychologist I would recommend you really go and read about, because she studies lawyers, and some of the insights are absolutely fascinating. But most importantly, she describes something called the fixed identity trap. And that is the habit of defining yourself entirely by external measures of success: grades, scholarships, pupillage offers, case outcomes. It's beginning to sound like a barrister's profile on a chamber's website. And for many in the legal profession, these can become a foundation of an identity. Why is it dangerous? It's dangerous because when rejection comes, and inevitably it does for all of us, when we experience failure, one thing that you've failed, it becomes I am a failure. The distinction between behaviour and identity absolutely collapses. And I think that's really, really important to bear in mind. It's particularly relevant to the bar because we know there are certain traits: high achievers, perfectionists, and it's a matter of moving that identity trap to I'm only as good as my last case, to I'm in a career where setbacks are part of the job and where each one gives me the material to grow. And I think we're going to hear more about that when we hear from two barristers shortly. So this reframing, I think, is really, really important. And as we go on our journey, that is what I would encourage you to do. So the next thing I want to just cover briefly is how do we build these structures in our life to help us with feedback and growth. I think the bar is very difficult. It's very difficult because feedback is inconsistent. Few barristers have line managers, and it means you need to build your own systems for feedback and coaching. So that might mean seeking out coaching, seeking out feedback, using peer groups. I would encourage you to use a bit of self-coaching. And these are really, really important because let's go back to that stage 2 of building competence. It allows you to stay in stage 2 long enough for growth to take hold. I want to talk a bit also about sustainability and mental health. So resilience is not just about bouncing back in the moment. It's about sustaining yourself in an environment that is, by design, adversarial, it's high pressure, and it's often solitary. The realities of your practice means that you will spend hours alone preparing cases, drafting opinions, or just travelling. And this solitude can become corrosive if it's not balanced and if you don't build connections around you. When you step from that cauldron of your own mind and all of that difficult noise that's going in and all of that self-doubt that's going on inside your head, and you step into a conference or into a court, the intensity spikes, the adrenaline surges, you're face to face with a client in distress that you're responsible for defending. And these roles carry weight even when you appear outwardly calm. This is absolutely a cauldron for a mental health disaster. And therefore, I don't want you to think about mental health as something that's peripheral to your practice. It's central to competence and the competence journey that you're on. Peer networks are one of the strongest protective factors against this, because I think unlike line managed professions, barristers rarely have someone checking in on them daily. This means you need to build those small circles of trust. These can be peers on your circuit, they could be former classmates from bar school, they could be former co-pupils, or even just a mini chambers in a sports club, a bar, whatever works for you. But they become sounding boards, they become pressure valves, a place where you can normalise the challenges of practice. And if you're not putting those in place now, I would encourage you to do so. There are also structured networks, mentoring schemes from the inns, of course. There's well-being initiatives with the Bar Council, and the specialist bar associations. But let's also just focus on some of those really important hygiene factors. Protecting your sleep, your exercise, your nutrition, having clear boundaries about when you're available and when you're not, and maintaining a healthy interest outside the law. But when it breaks, support is there, and please don't think it isn't. So law care, well-being at the bar, and the Inns of Court are all there to support and advise on this very, very important issue. So I'm going to conclude by what I've called a framework for failing forwards and building resilience. Would you mind just advancing the slide? Thank you. This is going to assist me in my transition to Sarah, who's going to speak next, because I just want to, I've called this my sort of framework for professional resilience at the bar. First and foremost, self-awareness. It doesn't matter what you use to promote reflective practice, but don't pay lip service to it, because every setback and every emotional response you have is a data point. Take that reflective practice and use that as data, and use whatever structured model you need to help you turn that into learning. Complement that with feedback. Deliberately create relationships with peers where you can talk about your performance and get feedback, and turn that into goals. Have a good, strong foundation of well-being, people around you that care about you and people that you can talk openly to. And peer networks, I think, are really, really key. And then have an identity beyond success. Resist the fixed identity trap at all costs. Cultivate interests and values that are outside of the courtroom. So this isn't a panacea. Together, these elements do form a framework that I think help us deal with setbacks and deal with this difficult landscape in a way that is ultimately productive. They're not going to remove failure, and that is where the next two speakers are going to develop our understanding. But they do help us reframe it as part of a journey towards competence and ultimately confidence. So in summary, I don't think the path to the bar is neither fair or linear, and it's definitely not guaranteed. But failing forwards does just mean accepting failure as inevitable, and through deriving meaning from it and direction from it, we have the foundations of resilience. I'm going to hand over to Sarah now, who's going to take.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tony. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah Idelby. As you've heard, I'm a public lawyer at 39 Essex Chambers, and I am a failure. Before you think that I've wandered into the wrong kind of meeting, I do mean what I say. And I'm not alone. Did you know that Marie Curie was a failure? The French Academy of Sciences denied her membership despite the fact that she was already a relatively successful scientist at the time, probably due to sexism, chauvinism, and racism. Did you know that Steve Jobs was a failure? He was ousted out of Apple after a couple of lackluster ideas, but then came back years later and set the world alight with the iPod. Did you know that Barack Obama was a failure? In the year 2000, Obama lost the House of Representatives election to his Republican opponent for the 1st District of Illinois, with only 30% of the vote to the victor's 61%. And my failures? Let me tell you about my first failure on my legal journey. I fell down the stairs before my Cambridge interview. And that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was this. When I was sprawled across the landing at the foot of the stairs, right next to the interview room, the interviewers opened the door. Yes, to me, on the floor. It turns out, and I am not ashamed to admit now, that I'm just not the sort of person to cognitively recover from falling down a 15th century staircase. I had a lot less compassion for myself for failing at that interview. I also had less compassion for myself for not getting certain mini pupilages, not getting a first, not getting pupillage the first, second, or third time. So what do I, Marie Curie, Steve Jobs, and Barack Obama all have in common? And it's not just the turtleneck jumpers. It's this. Every time we fall down, we get up, brush ourselves off, and then we try again. The most important lesson that you can take away for your entire career is this. Your success is dependent on your changing your relationship with failure. And we know that the only way really to achieve success, through science or otherwise, is changing potentially how you perceive failure, which is what John Paul's going to discuss with you, or, in my case, changing your desire for failure, understanding that in fact you need to want failure to succeed. Attempting to avoid failure because you fear it will often procure its occurrence. And we sort of know this, don't we? Have you ever tried to not do something and then inevitably it happens? Decided that you were never going to have sugar again and then suddenly you've eaten a piece of cake? Have you accidentally sent a text message to someone you were talking about in the message rather than the person you planned to send it to? There are some fascinating studies done on chronic pain patients where neuroimaging demonstrates that they can feel pain when they're told that a heat source has been applied to them, but when in fact there is no sensory stimuli. This means that your brain is capable of making something a reality when it's not even there. So why do it with failure? We think about it in an attempt to avoid it, and then in that sense, make it a reality in its worst possible guise. Why are we so worried about failure? I'm going to wager something with you. I think that you like to win. Am I close? Do you know how I know? Because I like to win too. John Paul, do you like to win?
Yeah.
Lawyers love to win. And as a side note, I suspect that we had to impose those professional conduct rules to mitigate that instinct to win. But that instinct to win is what tells your soul that anything less than winning is a failure. It's a loss. It's a rejection. Every time you feel like you have been rejected from something, that triggers a physiological response in yourself. Because unfortunately, our brains are not wired to tell the difference between being rejected for a pupillage interview and being rejected from your tribe in our caveman days. We're social creatures. Rejection from our tribe meant death. So feeling like a reject or a loser will trigger fear and anxiety. It's going to trigger that survival instinct, which makes every setback a battle of life or death. Not getting a pupillage interview is a battle of life or death. Think about that, and think about how silly that sounds. And look, I am with you. I'm not here to shame those feelings that we have about rejection and failure, but it's trying to make you alive to it, label it, control it before it controls you. Because by comparison, surviving failure makes you stronger. In his book, Learnt Optimism, Martin Seligman accounts for a study he carried out with a large insurance company called MetLife. They were trying to exponentially increase their sales force, and Seligman introduced into the recruitment process an attributional style questionnaire, the ASQ, which effectively asks, how optimistic are you? And of the recruits, they divided them into the optimists and the pessimists. And within the optimists, there was in fact a subgroup, people who just fell short of the competency criteria, but scored very highly on the ASQ. So these were really optimistic people. And across a number of different metrics, Seligman found that the optimists outperformed their pessimist colleagues by up to 57%. He even found that the optimists that fell short of the competency criteria even outperformed their other optimist colleagues. So what this tells us is, it's not about the skill set. It's because they were optimists. They recovered from rejection faster, and they did so noting these 3 traits which are essential for you to change your relationship with failure. Firstly, optimists see failure as temporary. Pessimists see failure as permanent. Secondly, optimists narrow the scope of the failure. It happened this time. Pessimists let failure contaminate everything. This always happens to me. Thirdly, optimists recognize external factors but take appropriate responsibility, and pessimists blame themselves, others, the universe, whatever not. And it's those 3 traits which tend to explain why some people bounce back from failure whilst others don't. I'm not trying to advise you on toxic positivity here, but I am asking you to note this truth. Failure is an indispensable prerequisite to success. It is impossible to truly succeed without failing. The progress of humankind is built on the back of failing over and over and over again. Fire, farming, flying, they are all products of numerous failures. Your relationship with failure may feel like a win-lose. But if the win is at the end of a number of different losses, was the journey not a success overall? And if that is true, then why not enjoy it and take the opportunities? And if you win, that's amazing. And if you lose, well, that's even better, because you will be further along in your journey and you will be even wiser for the remainder of it. I wanted to start a legal tech company for a while, but it's sort of out of the scope of my knowledge. I've never worked at a startup. I've never really even worked in tech. My business as a barrister really is a completely different beast to a tech company. But I just saw more and more of my ideas become someone else's reality. At the start of this year, I had an idea for Advocacy, which is my online advocacy training platform, #ad. And I decided I wanted to get this into the world. So I looked at myself and said, Sarah, right, we've got to start failing. So I have had to go back to these strategies that I am going to outline for you today. I didn't even know I did that with the PowerPoint presentation, but there you go. These are my 7 strategies to succeed with failure. Firstly, radical self-honesty. Be honest with yourself about your abilities and use that fuel for your development. I was on a mini pupillage and the supervisor told me that public law was really for the Oxbridge firsts, and so I probably should be aiming for something else. Motivational? But it did push me to look at myself honestly, and I did know that the majority of the great public lawyers were the Oxbridge firsts, even if not exclusively. I couldn't go back in time and not fall down the stairs. And so I had to seek opportunities in adjacent areas of law, hone my skills there, and establish a stronger presence. And that took me to a common law set, where I am now an enthusiastic trial advocate, as well as a public lawyer, which has given me an edge in the civil proceedings in human rights and equality law. Radical self-honesty also involves being clear about what you are willing to give in order to succeed. I have lived in some really quite disturbing residences to save money to eventually pay for my master's and to do an internship abroad. Every person I knew who did not get pupillage first time round, but who stuck at it and sought the opportunities to grow, they got pupillage. Be honest about your investment, because then you can see your output through the lens of your input. Secondly, carry out regular self-appraisals. For every weakness you identify, you must find action you must take to address it. If you haven't done much advocacy outside of your classes, sign up for moots. If you are concerned about your academic credentials, then make it your goal to win an essay prize or decide to do a master's. Step 1 was about being honest with yourself, and step 2 is about understanding what steps you need to take to succeed. Third, post-mortem events. I came out of a pupillage interview once and I thought, I have nailed that. The panel and I had great chemistry, the conversation was flowing, I got all of the great micro expressions, and zilch, nothing, no second interview. They didn't even give me feedback when I asked. What went wrong? I know what went wrong because I carried out the post-mortem. I was just a little bit too warm in the interview, and when it comes to interviews, you need to find the balance between warmth and competence. So carry out those post-mortems. Even in practice, I used to keep a slim, handheld, written diary. I know it sounds odd. And after every time I went to court, I wrote in it what I thought I did well that day and what I thought I had done badly. Look at your patterns over time. Are you doing the same thing? Are you noticing a mistake? And if so, then you have just identified a point for that second stage self-appraisal. Fourth, flip your script. This is the kind of cognitive restructuring to have that positive, optimistic mindset. If you are the sort of person to say, it's always like it, change it. Say it happened this time. If you are the sort of person to say you're not good enough, tell yourself that your approach needs adjusting, but that you are good enough. Your self-talk will have a real impact on your performance. All you have to do after you leave here is decide to Google psychology study, self-talk and performance, and it will give you numerous studies about how your self-talk can improve your performance. So why not take that edge when it is so easy to hone? Some people find affirmations in the morning helpful. Some people find positive journaling helpful. Some people like meditation or yoga nidra. I'm not suggesting that you have to find something that's sort of new agey, woo-woo type stuff. All I'm suggesting is that you find a way to tell yourself every day that you are capable of success. 5, seek opportunity. And by this, I don't mean asking individual barristers for mini pupilages or pupilages. What I mean is, if someone has offered you help, take it, as long as you're safe, of course. If there are free resources available, then use them. If your inn offers clinics, mentoring, etc., why not take it? Students often query why we have those qualifying sessions, especially mixed messes at Gray's Inn. The chance to have the undivided attention of a practicing barrister, to ask them about their reflections, their answers to popular pupillage questions, whether they like or dislike a practice area, what the current legal affairs are in their mind. The opportunities are endless. Opportunities can also come from unexpected places, so be alive to them. Try to create opportunities and be polite and respectful when you ask, because some people may have family responsibilities or other obligations. Not everyone will say yes. But if they say no, then you're in no different a position than you were had you never asked. One of my favorite TED Talks is called What I Learned from 100 Days of Rejection. And I really recommend that you go and watch it, because it will reframe your perception of the responses that you get to rejection. And often it will not be about you, it will be about a number of other things, and that allows for you to come back. 6, stop timing yourself. Time is a construct. I was really frustrated when I didn't get pupillage the first time round, and I started to worry, oh my God, am I wasting my life applying and not getting pupillage every year? But do you know what I did in that time? I worked at what is now called the Government Legal Department in what is known, and it was effectively a year-long pupillage in the administrative court, because I was following around all the barristers for the solicitors' cases, and so now I know a lot of very senior public lawyers at the bar. I did a master's, and that meant I was part of the winning team of the Telders International Mooting Competition. I went to work in South Africa for a judge in its transformational constitutional court, and that changed my life. J.R.R. Tolkien started writing Lord of the Rings when he was 45 years old. You are not too late. It is not taking too long. You are just in time for your success. 7, be adaptable. Some people call this having a plan B, but this is more about not being static. It is said that the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. When I was applying for pupillage, I changed jobs regularly. Every year I had to add something new to my CV. I tried different approaches even when it made me feel uncomfortable, and I do the same now. If you're not willing to be adaptable for yourself, how are you going to be adaptable for your client, for your cases, for your judge? A career at the bar may be your dream for now. It is mine, but I dream of other things. Some of my bar school colleagues decided that their dream was in academia or in business or in baking, which is delicious. They did not fall victim to a sunk cost fallacy that because they started, they had to finish here. They took the transferable skills, the lessons that they learnt from failing, and adapted with a big glug of that radical self-honesty. You may look at the pupillage statistics and think, ugh, that's just how challenging it's going to be. But that's not actually what those statistics show. Those statistics reflect those people who are undeterred from succeeding, whether or not it is in a career in or out of the bar. Your goal now may not be your success story, but if you have changed your relationship with failure, then I have no doubt that you will delight in being a successful failure too.
It's wonderful to be here with a bunch of lawyers at the start of their career. And I say it deliberately, you are all a bunch of lawyers. The only difference between Sarah and I is we're further along the journey. I'm John Paul, Naval officer, commander, barrister, and you guessed it, a failure too. It feels a bit like a meeting of Failures Anonymous, doesn't it? But it's actually quite freeing when you accept that and come to terms with it. Because failure's not an identity, it's a process. If you stick at this profession long enough, you're going to fail 1,000 small times before each big win. And that's how it should be. I thought I'd start with a story from my military service. In January 2005, almost 21 years ago, I went through the gates of Britannia Royal Naval College, Dartmouth, as an officer cadet. On the first morning, the Commodore, who was essentially the head teacher, senior officer in charge of the college, got us all together, and amongst other things he said, "In your career, we'll never expect you to do something that you've not been trained to do before." And I couldn't really understand what he meant. I joined the Navy as an officer. How could they train me in 12 months for everything I might face as an officer and a leader? War, I'd read, is chaotic, fast-paced, and never goes to plan. But understand it or not, I found it quite comforting to hear. Some years later, I found myself in command of a Royal Navy warship. 60 people on board, all looking to me for command, leadership, guidance, orders, and example. One morning, we were on our way to Spain. We'd been up for about 18 hours, really bad weather, loads of people seasick. And after about 18 hours, we came alongside La Coruña, buttoned up alongside, and I sent all of the off-watch, including myself, to bed for some rest. I'd been in bed 10 minutes, overalls off, under the covers, all snugly, and then I felt a violent lurch in the ship, followed seconds later by the general alarm and the words, "Flood, flood, flood," flood in the engine room. Overalls on, ran up to the bridge. I bumped into my senior engineer running up the stairwell. He just looked at me and said, "This is bad, sir, really bad." And I promise you, those are not words you want to hear from a senior engineer on board a warship. When I reached the bridge of the ship, from where we controlled all emergencies, I was met by chaos. Alarms blaring, people shouting, the engine room cameras showing flood water rising. A famous military leader, Viscount Slim, once said, "One day something will happen. Nobody will say a word. Everyone will look at you. All they're asking for is leadership, and you'll never be more alone in your life." It was kind of like that. But someone did speak. They looked me right in the eyes and said, "What do we do, sir? We're sinking." Now, we think about failure. In my 20s, I was facing potentially the first loss of a Royal Navy warship since the Falklands. And at that moment, the words of my Commodore came to me: "We will never ask you to do something for which you've not been trained to do before." And I thought to myself, lying bastard. Now, I'm going to leave that story there, and we're going to come back to it at the end of this talk. But before we go any further, and forgive me, Dean, I'm going to ask you to indulge me in a bit of an exercise. If you've got your phones, please take them out. Don't take a picture of me, please. Firstly, I'd like you to look to the left of you, at the person to the left of you. This isn't a song, I promise. Then the person at the right. And then if someone's behind you, look at the person behind you. Excellent. Now, with your phone, try not to get anybody else in frame. Take a selfie. I prepared my hair specially, so it's easy for me. So, why did I get you to do that? In this room here now sits a future Silk, a future judge, perhaps a future Lord or Lady Chief Justice. It could be the person you've just looked at, it could be you. But there's one thing of which we're all certain, that with effort, curiosity, and some constructive failure, you are all capable of being barristers. And that selfie, I want you to save it, regardless of how horrendous you might think it is. For those moments of doubt, I want you to look at that picture. The only person capable of stopping you becoming a barrister is the person on your phone. You're embarking on an absolutely incredible journey. From today onwards, you're going to learn from your tutors, your peers, your cases, but most of all, and I absolutely promise you, you're going to learn the most from when it went wrong. And it's quite uncomfortable to hear, isn't it? You've had 3 people get up and say to you, surprise, you're all going to fail. But that's how it has to be. All of us who've studied law, and you have previously, can profess that we're trained to win. From the very start, we're meant to get it right, spot the issue, know the answer, nail the examination. But ask yourself critically, what's so bad about getting something wrong whilst you're learning? I'm assuming most people here drive. Everybody use a sat-nav to get to where you need to go? Yeah. Anyone missed a turning before? What happens? Your sat-nav does not scream at you, oh my God, you failed, you've screwed that up, we're all going to die. What it does, I mean, I've muted mine, but what it does is it says recalculating. And it finds you a new way to get where you need to go. That's how you need to treat failure. It's not an ending, it's a moment of recalculation. Because being told that you've got it wrong in class, failing to secure pupillage first, second, third time, not winning a case, they're not the end of the world. And with Sarah, they feel like it. I get it, absolutely get it, but they are not the end of the world. The only failure that you should be worried about is making the same mistake twice because you've not learned from it. And while I'm on that, mistakes, I'm pretty hard over on this. Something is only a mistake if you do the same wrong thing twice, because it means you've not learned. So be easy on yourself. Things can go wrong. It's fine. Part of learning to deal with and accept failure for what it is reframing. We've talked about it before. Growth moments. They're not failures, they're growth moments. It's not imposter syndrome, it's a growth moment. Think about building muscle at the gym. And I know what you're all thinking, this is an area of expertise of mine, but it's quite important. To build muscle, you need more reps, a progressively harder weight. You're lifting harder weights, doing more reps until you get to failure. That moment that muscle group says, no, thanks, done enough, that is how you grow muscle. At that specific moment, your muscle cells are literally ripping themselves in half. They're dividing so that they can grow. That's what you need to apply to your practice in the law. Your practice is a muscle. It needs to be pushed to failure to grow. And once it grows, you become stronger and better. Now let's talk about exams. You're going to have lots of assessments, and I hate to say it, but it's not going to end after Bar Course. But here's a trick I've learned, and I'd encourage you to do yourself. When you see the exam timetable, the schedule, anything to do with exams, cross the word exam out and replace it with test. In this profession, the only exam that you're preparing for is the real life case with a real live client before a judge where the stakes are high. Everything else is a test. Tests can be failed and resat and retaken. That exam you need to do your best in. Everything before it is the opportunity to fail safely and learn. And I say exactly the same to my juniors in the military. Everything that we do in our training is just a test. The real examination is live operations, where the stakes are so high that it doesn't bear thinking about if it goes wrong. Before then, we test, we test, we test, we fail, we fail, we fail, we get better. And I want to highlight something I could bet money on that almost everyone in this room is this way. And it's a dangerous part of being an advocate, and that's perfectionism, because it holds all of this back. We all want to do well, but there's a difference between doing well and being a perfectionist. This idea that a good barrister, a future judge or silk, never slips, never stumbles, never forgets a case citation or authority, it's pure fantasy. It really is. Real advocates, the ones that you can all become one day, you're forged in the moments where it goes awry and it goes wrong. The cross-examination that stumbles, the judge who doesn't follow any of your argument, I've been there, and the client who's furious because they didn't win in the way they wanted you to. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. It's tough, and you're going to leave those experiences bruised. My first court-martial, it's a military court. Think a few good men, except I'm taller than Tom Cruise. Not as good looking, but there we are. My first court-martial, every technical thing that could have gone wrong went wrong. It helps that my client was guilty. And I say that, I had to think about that a lot later. He refused to plead guilty. We had a trial. He was found guilty. It's the only thing that stopped me crying myself to sleep each night. Every single thing that could have gone wrong did go wrong. I went back to my office where my colleagues were, and they printed out a blue plaque. Fitzgibbon was here. His advocacy died this day. You've got to have some humour, and you've got to pick yourself up. And I went back into court 2 weeks later and nailed it. You're going to have the bad days. It's fine. You come out of them sharper, more self-aware, and more human. That's what it's all about. And when you start to see it this way, that failure is feedback, but with the volume turned up, it's right in your face. It's the best kind of feedback you can get, so long as you can analyse it. You see it that way, the sting goes out of it. So how do I deal with failure, and how could you do the same? How do you make it constructive and not corrosive? Well, this is what I do, and I recommend you do similar. Be yourself. Throughout training and practice, you're going to see so many great advocates. People that are commanding, theatrical, quiet, cerebral, poetic. And you'll be tempted to imitate them. Don't. Imitation is just mimicry. You're not mastering anything if you imitate somebody else. If you're not yourself when things go wrong, you're not really failing. Somebody else is failing through your actions because you've copied them. So you're not learning anything. Find your own rhythm, your own voice, your own style, and then you're going to connect with the tribunal in a way that you couldn't in any other way. This authenticity is the foundation of your credibility. And you can only learn a lesson from a mistake that you've made yourself. I truly believe that. The next one is most failures, most of these moments where it's going wrong, you'll figure it out as it's happening. You'll see it happening almost like a slow motion car crash. I promise you it does. And it can be awful at the time. How do we fix that? The in the moment skill is to pause. Take a pause. You steady yourself while it's going wrong around you. That advocacy exercise that you're going to do that will unravel. The unexpected intervention from the judge in here or real. The email that makes your stomach drop. This is where your resilience as a barrister is going to be and as a lawyer. Pause, breathe, take a moment of silence before your next move. When you pause, you actually take control of your mind before the emotions hijack it. And that's the key bit, because emotions do take over otherwise. When you don't, you react. And I can promise you now, reactions rarely yield the best outcomes. That small pause, a half breath, it gives you the space to think clearly, to recover in a moment. And whilst it might feel like forever to you, actually the pause shows command, presence, and it looks good to those outside. But remember that pause, because we're going to come back to it later in my story. Then keep perspective. Once that moment has passed, it's perspective that stops you spiraling. At the bar, the stakes feel really high. Every rejection's personal, every loss monumental at the time. Step back from it. You're learning a craft. You're not defined by a single moment, good or bad. Losing a case doesn't make you a bad advocate any more than a single wave defines a tide. It just means that today somebody else's argument landed better, and it has to happen in every single case. If you can keep that balance, then the next two habits, seeking feedback, which Sarah's talked about, and keeping a log, which I also do, they become tools for growth rather than adding to self-doubt later on. So seek feedback and seek it widely. At the bar, Tony mentioned, line management doesn't really exist, particularly in the self-employed bar. You've got to go out and get feedback. If you don't seek it, you won't get it. Sometimes you do, but it's rare. People are busy, so you need to ask them. Once the dust settles, go looking for it. Ask your tutor, your peers, your opposite number in court, and it will help you. Very few barristers do I come up against who you wouldn't want to see again. They will help you if they're more experienced if you ask them for it. What worked, what didn't. It's not weakness, it's professionalism. And people, the vast majority, respect us when we're looking to improve. They can see that that's what we all want to do for the profession, and they will help people looking to improve. For me, I started as a criminal barrister. I'm now a public international law barrister as well. In crime, the roving room is absolutely key. Anyone that's going to be in crime, and family to an extent as well, the roving room is great. People sit there and they tell stories, and they'll tell you about the day that you've just had. They'll have had a worse one, I promise you, at once in a time. You learn and you learn and you learn. Use it. And people are really generous when you want to help yourself. Then, as Sarah said, log it. Log what you've learned. Not every time maybe, but I still do it sometimes. On your phone or a notepad, write down what went wrong and what went well. Or as my 11-year-old daughter told me the other day, font of wisdom, when I was preparing for this, she said, "Oh, Dad, at school, we do it with what went well and even better if." And I thought, wow, that's quite positive, isn't it? Everything is a positive moving forward to get better. Over time, this record that you've made, so long as you go back to it and read it, it's your personal flight data recorder, your black box. Patterns will emerge, and patterns tell stories. You're going to see stories of growth, of resilience, and how you're getting better and what you can do to improve later on. And when you look back months or even years later, you'll realise that you didn't just get through those moments, you grew through them. The record becomes evidence of progress. If I were to talk about a golden thread that I think the three of us kind of brings it all together of what we've talked about, I'd say it boils down to the fact that life is experience. The bar is all about experience. And the bar, more than most professions, it's a life of continuous learning. Bar course, pupillage, tenancy practice, each stage is a series of tests designed to help you fail forwards. You're going to make mistakes, you're going to lose cases, you'll misjudge cross-examinations, and every time you're going to add another tool to that toolbox that you carry around with you. Your clients, the people who trust you with their liberty, their families, their livelihoods, most of them don't expect perfection. What they do expect is preparation, honesty, and for you to fight fearlessly for their cause. So take every single setback as a training evolution, a recalculation, a new route plotted, because that's what failing forwards really means. It's the courage to see failure as part of progress, an integral part, the humility to learn from it, and the strength to keep going. And one day, probably far sooner than you think, someone's going to look at you and see not a failure, but the finished product of 1,000 small recalculations. When I come back to that story that I started with, the flood in the engine room, well, here's how it went. I got to the bridge, the noise was deafening, alarms, people shouting for information, everyone shouting over one another, and I asked, probably shouted for silence. And I took 60 seconds, said nothing. Alarms were cancelled, nobody spoke. In that time, I scanned the damage control board, looked at the cameras, and then I acted. Calm, deliberate, one decision at a time, which is what you need to do in court. As a team, we stopped the flood. A brave petty officer ran down to where the water was coming in and stuffed a bedsheet into it, which stopped the flow enough to get our pumps working to balance the water. We found the cause, a young engineer very young. We were really struggling for engineers in the Navy at the time. So we're bringing people to sea at a stage they normally wouldn't come to sea. A young engineer was trying to help. He'd removed an engine room cooling strainer, but he forgot to isolate the pipework, and he opened the ship up to the sea. And I tell you, seawater moves in really quick into the people tank, and it's not meant to be there. So we stopped the flooding. No one was hurt. We got an extra 4 days alongside in Spain. Everything's a bonus. But it cost over £500,000. Higher command back in the UK, not on scene, not in command of the ship, but my bosses wanted me to discipline that engineer, and I refused. He didn't get out of bed that morning intending to make a mistake. He was trying to help. So what I did instead was I said, right, when the dust settles, you're going to get everyone together and you're going to teach them the importance of operating procedures and following them. Then when we get back to the UK, you're going to go to the engineering school and you're going to teach them. He became one of our strongest assets, and he made us better sailors. So that day I learned something that applies just as much to the bar as it does command. That what my Commodore was saying when he said, we'll never ask you to do something you'd not trained to do before, wasn't that I was getting a route map to figure everything out. It's that I'd be given the skills and I'd learn the skills to add things to the toolbox. And your client, like the military and you all expect of us, demand that you can dip into that toolbox at the right time and bring the right one out. And you only get that through experience. Knowing which tool to pick up comes from the experience of failing. So when you leave today and you walk out into drizzle, I wrote this beforehand, and funny old thing, it's England, it's drizzling. Remember this, please. Failure is not the opposite of success, it's the route to it. The only mistake worth fearing is one that you refuse to learn from. So go out there, fail fast, fail forwards, fail with purpose. And finally, at the bar, we'll never ask you to do something you've not been trained to do before. And the training starts now. Thank you.